Welcome, campers. It's basic training boot camp for your cash. All the things you're supposed to know about managing your money, but no one ever taught you. Here's your host, Steve Noviello.
Welcome back. My guest today, Eric Armstrong, president of Quick Roofing. How long have you guys been around?
34 years.
In Dallas?
In Dallas-Fort Worth.
That's a lot of roofs.
It is a lot of roofs. We're right now at about 150,000 roofs that we've done in Dallas-Fort Worth.
So I have to say, first of all, welcome. And second, this time of year especially, is this a busy, it's kind of storm season, so I would imagine it's a busy time of year for you.
It is, absolutely. A lot of calls coming in, and the storms bring a lot of work.
They also bring a lot of workers who aren't necessarily from a company like yours. I think that oftentimes, and we go out too. We're in the news business, so a terrible storm hits, and the first place we go to is a neighborhood with terrible damage and whatnot, and we see it all the time. Folks are desperate to get something fixed, and that I think kind of has an effect on their judgment in terms of who they're going to use.
Absolutely. They're going to get inundated with roofers, contractors knocking on doors. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Typically, a good contractor would be out there trying to help people.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys do that? When there's a storm, do you go to a neighborhood and start handing out business cards, or?
Absolutely. So we have a huge network. Our guys, our own team, we have about 75 guys here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and then from that, our roofers. But yes, we're willing to help, and we go into a neighborhood with the crews able to do that work correctly.
So, because we hear a lot about it on the news, and we will tell people, myself included, look, if somebody shows up at your door, that's not the guy you want to use. But maybe, to your point, you do that. You go out and say, hey, we're here, let's get started.
Yes, because of the nature of it. So typically, people do say, hey, I'm not going to call somebody. I'm going to call somebody that I choose.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there's probably 3,000 plus roofing contractors in Dallas-Fort Worth alone.
Yeah.
And a huge majority of those are just in business with a hailstorm and come right out of business with a hailstorm. So the legitimate guys that work every single day of the year or every work day of the year and have been in business, those guys still go after and pursue business because you want to be considered.
Yeah, sure.
But it is tactics on how they're doing it. You'll see people who are very disrespectful. I don't know how they get business, but sometimes you see that.
Right.
Very aggressive.
Right.
We try to teach empathy. It's been a tremendous, upsetting when you get your house destroyed.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's kind of lay the ground rules here. So just because somebody shows up at my house to say, hey, I'm a roofer, doesn't necessarily mean I should disqualify them, right? But I really do want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence here. So how do I even go about doing that? The first question I think a lot of people are going to have is, are roofers do they need to be licensed in the state of Texas?
Unfortunately, in Texas, no, they do not.
That's the problem.
That is an absolute problem.
So anybody, and I just want to make sure that our viewers understand what that means. Unlike other professions, a cosmetologist, so somebody to cut your hair has to have a license, but to come and fix your roof, there is no license needed. That means I could be a roofer tomorrow if I get a flatbed full of shingles and a hammer and some nails.
Absolutely, and you don't even have to have that. So you could be,
we'll get to that in a minute.
So yes, and we feel like that's the hardest thing for a homeowner to do is really decide who's good from bad.
Right. And because there's no licensure, there's also no way for me to inspect your license. There's no way for me to look at any sort of official license record because it's not required.
Absolutely. And what you can do is look at manufacturing. There's of course Better Business Bureau, which some people do know how to read and some don't. Sometimes they think if you have one complaint, you're off the list, whereas it sometimes depends on the reasoning. But I like the manufacturers. The manufacturers a lot of times will endorse roofers, suppliers. I think references, most people don't call references now, unfortunately. And because people don't want to be disturbed, right? Everybody's busy in life, but there's some real ways to check people. Facebook is pretty key. Most roofing contractors probably have a Facebook feed. And if you're seeing review after review after review, then you can trace it back possibly and see, okay, this is an actual homeowner, not just their friend, but an actual homeowner that did it. and you see photographs and maybe reviews.
You know, it's kind of heartbreaking to me. There are so many times I will get an email from a viewer that says, hey, I hired this roofer and now, you know, whatever went wrong. And they say, you know, now I'm doing research and there's all sorts of complaints and you know, and they've contacted me with all of this evidence thinking, okay, this is going to be a good story. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, I say to them, had you just used Google, if nothing else, prior to hiring this person, you would have had all of this evidence before you handed them a check.
Yes, yes, and I also, one thing when you said the check, they should never ever give a check up front.
Okay, so let's talk about that because Tim Ryan and I on our morning show got grilled by a lot of viewers and many roofers called us. It was a hailstorm the beginning of June. There was all sorts of roof damage, and I was giving advice on choosing the correct roofer. And it came up in conversation during our chit chat on television that if somebody wants you to give them money up front for supplies, that's a red flag. Now, I believe that. If you are coming to me and say, hey, I'm a roofer, but listen, I'm going to need a couple $1,000s so I can buy supplies. I'm not saying you're a bad roofer. What I'm saying is you're not my roofer. Feel free to go somewhere else and do that. And I'll tell you, the phone's lit up. I mean, roofers, small, you don't understand. I'm a small business. I don't have that kind of money. I can't just front money for every job that I do. And we require, you know, half down, you know, up front or whatever. To me, that's a red flag. What do you think?
You know, unfortunately, just Quick Roofing. Quick Roofing's not fast. It's actually the founder's last name. I'm his partner now, but Jeff Quick, right? Mm-hmm. So he became one of the largest in the area, but one roof at a time. Bought the material, paid for the material, did it. Now, unfortunately, there's so many bad guys that even if it is a good guy that's needing to do that, mm-hmm. it hurts them. And so my thing is this, and I seen this happen last year. I got an example that I'd love to share, but you know, if a guy can't buy $2,000 or $5,000 worth of shingles, when a real problem happens, what happens?
Right.
So last year we were in Wiley, and a crew was driving. Their job had canceled for the day. They get done and they're driving away, and they see a roof that had been torn off. I got some pictures that I'll supply for you, and it's down, and the actual homeowners are up on the roof trying to put plastic over it. Well, what had happened is the crew made a bad mistake, poor management, whatever happened. They tore off the house. This is, again, another roofing contractor. We just drove by. Homeowners are trying to fix it, and we stop and render aid right there because they're like, house is getting ruined.
Right.
Well, the contractor could just as easily close their business, open another business tomorrow.
New name.
And the owner was left with a destroyed house. And so, you know, I think that the main thing is most contractors that have been in business, they know, hey, I'm going to have some. Now, of course, if I do the job and our agreement is upon completion, it's only 2 days to do most roofs. Mm-hmm. Now, there might be other incremental stuff, which is something your audience should be aware of because it causes other failures that you would probably get calls on. Mm-hmm. Mostly because you can, like roofing, we can scale. We have a very large company. A lot of roofers can scale, but when you think of the window damage, the screens, the AC damage, and so once you get all this, it scales so fast that there's hundreds of thousands of potential screens that need to be done. So now there's a bottleneck.
Right.
And so, but I think that most of the time, if they would, you know, or even at the very minimum, can you get the material on site before I give you something? If you really believe in the person, but
right.
But they should have it on site because too many stories of people robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
And
well, and again, you know, you can be someone else's roofer. You're not going to be my roofer. It's just, you know what? I've been around the block enough times, and maybe it's an occupational hazard. I get hundreds of phone calls and emails from people that say, I gave somebody $1,000. I never saw him again. You know, you've been using two terms here: one roofer and one contractor. Is there any sort of licensing difference between those two things, or again, to be a contractor in Texas, you don't need to have any sort of licensing?
Yeah, I'm using them kind of interchangeable,
sure.
But a lot of times what's happening within the industry is now because of storm damage, a roofer a lot of times is contracting the windows and contracting the gutters and contracting the fence repair, and so. That's, like I said, a lot of times that can cause some frustration. I think clear expectations, if they're set up front, if somebody said, hey, can you give me a schedule? they should know the schedule. And if it's going to be, hey, I'm going to roof your house on Monday and Tuesday, on Wednesday I'm doing your gutters, on Thursday I'm doing your fence, and on Thursday I want to do a final audit check with you. And a lot of times in this industry, the one negative, and we have to watch it and manage it as well, is that you get these sales guys and they're busy, they're selling, and there's so much to sell that we have to really, as an industry, manage them to ensure that it's like, hey, the most important thing is if you walk it and make sure a homeowner is 100% satisfied. Because even if you feel like they're 100% satisfied as a sales guy, if they don't walk it with the homeowner may not even notice, say something, and so that it bothers them. And so then something that's very small, maybe something that's like, oh, let me get that, and now it becomes an actual failure.
So for consumers here in Texas, so I don't have the luxury of checking your state and local license here, but there are some things that I can check on. One of them is insurance. What kind of insurance do I want my roofer to have?
They should absolutely have general liability insurance. This protects you so that if they do have a catastrophe happen on the job, then you should be covered. And that's, if they flood your house, if something unforeseen happens. And what I would recommend to the viewers or to your audience is it's very quick if they show you coverage to just call the agent. Because
so that's my next, right, because oftentimes people, oh yeah, sure, I've got insurance. I mean, I dealt with a realtor once who things got a little hairy, and he waived what was supposed to be his errors and omissions insurance in my face and said, and it turned out he didn't even have any.
Yes. And
so I think that oftentimes a homeowner will say, are you insured? Oh, yeah, we're insured. But I like your advice. Call the agent.
It just takes minutes. I mean, so many times it's just hey, can I check on this? Because insurance is extremely expensive. I mean, it's roofing, so it's, it's got
people
some
fall
risks.
off roofs.
Yeah, and so if they would just call and say, hey, I need to check on this, an agent would give them an answer right away.
And it's so interesting because I find that people in general are hesitant. I mean, I would imagine that if you're coming to my house to do a roof and I say, hey, do you have insurance? And you say yes, that if I say, great, I'd like to call your agent, you're not going to think worse of me as a homeowner. In fact, I would imagine you'd say, okay, hey, I better do a good job. I mean, this guy's, kind of buttoned up here. I think people are hesitant to double check on information that people supply them with.
They are. And I think that it's your home, your major investment. And I think that if a great contractor, I mean, we want people to check.
Of course.
We want to say, hey, check that we're a platinum contractor with Owens Corning. 400 nationally, and there's so many credentials that some of these guys can get that they should say, hey, look, this is different. One thing we hear from people is, oh, you're all the same. All roofers are the same, and that could be so far from the truth.
I get that too with newscasters. I mean, especially these days. You guys are all the same.
Yes.
So let me ask you, how often does somebody, when you say to them, oh, of course we're insured, how many of your clients say, okay, I'm going to call your agent? Do people even do it?
I don't think they do. We do provide them a certificate, and they could absolutely see that. But again, just that, we can make that on Google.
I was going to say, go to Kinko's and get me a nice certificate. Are there different, is the scenario different when it's hail damage? So that's something that we see this time of year in Texas. Are there things I should be looking out for that are, the difference between, hey, this is hail damage, or hey, I just need a new roof?
Yes, I mean, you want to have it inspected. A lot of times people say, hey, I don't have any damage. And truly they may not. And if a good contractor investigates it, they'd tell them no. But you can't see it from the ground typically. Right. So a good photo documented inspection report is valuable. And usually that should be provided free by a contractor trying to earn your business. But it does change. Sometimes what you'll find is a lot of guys are like, do not want to give a bid. My company, we love to give a bid. We don't mind doing that. But a lot of people are like, well, let me see your insurance paper, Steve. And then it kind of creates what I try to teach our guys is it creates maybe some anxiety. Am I giving you the best deal? Am I giving you the best I can give? And so but it is a standard in the industry, and it's very wise to look over the paperwork together after. Sometimes you may want to get the estimate first, but it's very wise to compare apples to apples. Yeah. Insurance will pay for things potentially that the contractor didn't see, or vice versa. We spot something that they missed, the adjuster missed, and that's very common. And people should understand that, because what's happening is the adjuster may be looking at a ton of stuff or we uncover stuff that's needs to be addressed.
Well, and we also hear a lot of time, specifically for hail damage, that not necessarily all of the damage the hail creates is visible immediately after the storm. That sometimes it kind of gets uncovered after a bit, particularly if we're talking about things like leaks.
Yes, and it takes a lot of times people that will be their answer when we're pursuing. I don't have any leaks. Usually it will take a lot of time. Now when Wiley got hit a couple years ago, that was devastation. So it was coming through the roof and coming into the house. People knew they had a problem. But typically it's maybe a year, so they don't have to rush. Sometimes people feel like they have to do it right that second. Mm-hmm. It's okay to wait a second. If you get an evaluation and somebody has to do emergency repairs, you know, and then you can kind of look and say, okay, here, maybe even pay for those emergency repairs should be very minimal. And then say, hey, I'm going to do my research though. You
know, and when we're talking about emergency repairs, really limit them to, at that point, you're just fixing things to prevent further damage. So if there's water entering your home, you're going to want to put up tarps or some sort of temporary boarding or something. That's what you mean by that?
Yes, sir. So, you know, some guys will go to the full extreme and it's very minimal damage and then they tarp the whole roof. That's kind of a over the top way to do it, and they're probably going to charge the insurance company. It's usually, it takes a pretty big hailstorm to cause that kind of damage.
It also takes a pretty big hailstorm to need a whole new roof, and yet I hear that a lot from viewers. Well, this guy came out, he said, look, you need a whole new roof, and okay, sure. And it turns out, well, you didn't need a whole new roof, and now your insurance adjuster couldn't document that kind of damage, and you're on the hook now for the stuff that the insurance says you didn't actually need. So I should be getting a couple of different estimates and opinions here?
I think if they got a good opinion that's photo documented, and you know, because a roof can be damaged if it's big enough hail fairly easily. The insurance requires, if people don't know, people probably don't, but in a 10-foot by 10-foot area, that's called a square in roofing. Mm-hmm. They want 6 to 10 impacts depending on your insurance carrier, in a test square. They call it a test square, and that would be on all sides. But if the contractor you're working with shows you that and shows you pictures of the damage, they should be able to do that, and they should encourage you to make a claim at that point. Mm-hmm. But I would want to see photos if it were my house.
Well, of course.
And I think that if they can do that with today's technology, super easy to see that. So
I do want to touch just again on insurance. Is there an amount of insurance that it's one thing to say, well, sure, we're insured. Should I be concerned about how much coverage you have?
Most policies right now that are being written are probably $1 million per occurrence or $2 million cumulative. And so I would say at least $1 million.
For a general liability policy?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Because what we can find is, you know, like I said, in the one instance, I don't know what, we helped that day and then we didn't hear much else after this, because it was just, we found out after the fact that our crew stopped. Mm-hmm. We didn't even know that they were doing it. So we didn't know how it progressed, but probably the person's insurance got involved. Mm-hmm. But once that happens, it really causes some crazy stuff. But if somebody had insurance, failures happen. We're all human beings. So, I mean, somebody's going to make a mistake at times. Mm-hmm. It's how they react, right? I mean, you probably don't get calls when people react correctly. If they would just if a contractor would do what's right, or if people would do what's right, probably would, I mean, it'd be easier life, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure. What kind of things do you see? I'm assuming that, I mean, if I'm getting calls, you're probably getting them too. What kinds of things do you see when you're called out to a job site because it went wrong with somebody else?
Typically, we can find poor workmanship because a lot of times the homeowner may see a new shingle, it looks good from the ground.
Sure.
And then they start having leaks, and their roofing contractor is not answering the phone, so they didn't do good due diligence up front, potentially. And then on the backside, now they're trying to get a warranty taken care of, and potentially we investigate roofs every year. It's easier to replace the roof than to try to fix
because it's
so many
so
problems.
Poorly.
Yeah, you can find really some pictures and of stuff that, I mean, it just looks like somebody learned to roof today. Mm-hmm. And that they do it all wrong. So those are probably the extreme cases. Typically what we find is, you know, leaks and then maybe a lack of response to get the leak handled, so we come out and repair those and take care of those. So a good question your clients may ask is, do you have repair people? Do you have repair technicians that are your employees? Most probably don't. You know, because it's an overhead item, right? So they'd say, well, I just send my crew back if there's ever a failure. You know, so that's maybe a little not the norm. In fact, I'd say that most probably don't have them.
What's the difference? Why wouldn't I want the crew to come back?
Well, because for example, if there's another hailstorm in Oklahoma City tomorrow, some guys leave.
Right.
And so sometimes if they're not established here and they want to chase to the next storm, that's when, if they have local employees, sometimes it's easier to say, hey, come, and they're like, okay, no problem, we have our technician will be right there.
Sure. Let's talk about the estimate. So a roofer is going to come to my home. Obviously, you should always get an estimate up front. It bears repeating because, again, we get complaints all the time from folks who say, well, the guy came and said, it's going to be $8,000, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. How specific and detailed should my estimate be?
Like I said a moment ago, a lot of contractors don't want to give an estimate because they want to work off of the insurance scope and what they would call working with the insurance company to take care of you.
And is that a red flag, or what? I can't read your opinion of that.
No, it's not always a red flag because sometimes the devastation, if you want me to handle everything on a claim, then, for example, let's just take a window. Just like your window at your home, they use a program called Xactimate, and so when they use that, they just pick an item and say it's a window for $250. Well, if you have a Pella window, for example, it could be a $1,500 window. So sometimes we have to, if I bid it, if you have me bid a job, and then it's hard for you to know apples to apples how we've bid it. So it's real important, I guess, at that point, if you're going to get a bid, to understand apples to apples. Sometimes what people will do is say, here's my scope, and they take the pricing off the other side and say, hey, here, I want you to bid this. I would also say that it's how you feel comfortable. If somebody's respectful to you, not necessarily does that make the best difference, but usually you can, if somebody has a gut feeling that somebody's being unethical to them, if they're too pushy, if they're trying to close so hard, then I think that sometimes that can be a bigger red flag.
What about the idea of, because this is advice we give, and it may piss off roofers for all I know, but we generally say to people, okay, you're going to want to get a written estimate up front. Payments for work done along the way, I'm okay with. Certainly not anything up front, or any sort of, especially not a full payment up front. But then we also tell people, understand what the expectation here is in terms of a completion date. To say, okay, well, you're going to replace my roof. Is it unreasonable for me as a consumer to say to you, hey, I want to know when you're going to be done?
Oh, I think that's a mandatory deal. I think if you have a good, because none of us want the never-ending story. We don't want to be 5 months down the road saying, hey, I'm waiting on this.
Especially if it's my roof.
So the roof, like I said, that's where accurate, what we find happening, where the bottlenecks happening, they should know, okay, hey, if you're asking me to do your windows, the window company, the roof can be done. The roof might be able to be done today, but windows are 6 weeks backed up. And if you know that, maybe it's prepped up, but if I don't tell you that, it creates frustration, right? So you're sitting there going, hey, Eric, where's my window? And then I'm not giving you the feedback. That's where I think that frustration comes. But because there is sometimes a bottleneck just because of natural, not enough workers.
Well, sure, yeah, and and even I would imagine sometimes the supply issue as well, especially if you're dealing with an entire region that needs new roofs. We also tell people sometimes, look, you should not only get a completion date, but you should establish some sort of penalty if the job's not done without some sort of reasonable excuse. What do you think about that?
I've not ever had anybody do that. I think it's good. I think one thing we want to see is people push forward, because if you just sell, obviously, then somebody potentially gets put on the back burner. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, and we're moving around. So I think that it is important. Deadlines are great only because it keeps everybody working towards the end goal. I love what we try to do is set up, and it's even a new program for us, because we want to continue to push the ball and become a better contractor. And so what we're trying to do is really press with the homeowners, is saying, hey, this audit date, the audit is the key. Because if we know that we're going to walk in on Friday, then we better get done before Friday. So I think the deadline, even with a penalty, I would be open to that. I think that sometimes, because if I'm going to communicate to you effectively, if I say, hey, the windows, I don't know. Right. This guy's telling me 6 weeks, but if he goes 8,
Right. Then I can't make the deadline.
Then I
Right.
can't make the deadline. And so that's probably the negative part of us as contractors, is because, I say contractor / roofer, right?
Sure, yeah.
Together, because the main portion of the damage is the roof. But we do get, because we're contracting all of everything a lot of times, you get that. Now, one other advice I sometimes give to homeowners is, if it's your windows and you dealt directly with a company, then you would maybe be able to call that company, hey, John, you told me you're going to be here on this day, and it's your home, and it's the only home you care about, right? So you don't care if there's 100 people you're trying to get windows for. It's my home. I don't care, John, what.
100%.
I just want to know mine. So I've seen that. Like, I was working with a homeowner on a garage door many years ago, and I called the homeowner, and it took about 8 calls to get the appointment set. So it was, hey, Miss Jones, we want to get this scheduled. She's like, okay, anytime Friday. Got a garage door company, Friday's booked. How about Saturday? And then by the time the back and forth came, that can create, again, frustration. But if Miss Jones had directly called, sometimes she's not necessarily saving money by me doing it.
Sure, yeah.
Now, frustration, sometimes people are just like, look, I don't want to deal with eight contractors.
Sure, yeah. So we talked about the idea that there's really no license that you can check for roofers in Texas. But there are area trade associations and groups and whatnot. How important is something like that? I mean, should my roofer be a member of I'm assuming there's some sort of roofing trade organization that you belong to.
Yes, here in North Texas, we have the North Texas Roofing Contractors Association. Very informative. They got some lists that are questions that should be asked, that are, hey, ask your contractor these questions. And I got those for you, and I'll give them to you. But it really goes
So this is kind of the rundown that people should have if they find themselves in it. And some of these we looked at. So liability insurance and how much is it? What's your track record? And part of that, I mean, it's nice that you're going to tell me what your track record is. However, I should be able to call somebody and verify that this is actually true. We talked about being licensed and bonded. There is no licensing requirement. Talk to me about being bonded.
So a lot of companies will say licensed and bonded, even here locally. So that's sometimes a red flag of somebody coming from potentially outside the area. It's like, hey, if you're coming from out of state, you might think we have to be licensed, but there's no license. So how are you licensed and bonded?
Right.
So the bonded issue, I think that's one of those things, same as insurance, is nobody ever checks it. People can say I'm licensed and I'm bonded. Well, how much are you bonded for?
So for folks that are listening that say, okay, I've heard this before, I know I should know what being bonded means, but I don't. Explain it.
So bonded is going to be where they've actually checked our financials, right, the insurance company. And so if I'm bonded, say for example, for $100,000, if I fail, then the bonding company will end up fulfilling contract to the homeowner at the expense, and they'll take the $100,000 from me. And so bonded is so loose of a term that I would be very cautious of that, because somebody could be bonded for $5,000.
Right. So again, just like with insurance, I mean, you could be insured for $50,000, which is really of no use to me.
Yes, exactly.
It talks about here there being a project manager on site. I'm a huge fan of this. I like one point person. I want to deal with one guy at your company who's in charge of my project, and if there's any questions, I want to be able to contact that person directly. Is that important?
It is, because like I said, and what we do is we have both the salesman and a project manager, so they kind of work in conjunction. And the only reason we do that is because salesmen are trying to sell, and where we've seen a failure over time is that you get the project manager is there and not being pulled every direction if they're set up correctly. So we actually give a guy one job, he's going to fulfill that job, and then that will then allow him to move to the next job. So it just gives attention that instead of just people showing up, getting it done, and then nobody coming, that's been something that it happens in the industry. So project manager is a key.
Yeah. What kind of warranty should my roof have?
The industry right now is saying around 5 years.
Okay.
So for workmanship. So I would say that you're going to see 5 to 10 years. Again, one thing about that they may want to ask is, okay, you give me a 5-year warranty, what's your business plan to get there? Because I told you a moment ago, 3,000 roofing contractors registered in DFW. The market in a normal environment, so we've had some very active hailstorms the last 3 years. If there's some dry years, then homeowners have to be thinking, okay, what are you going to do if there's no hail? Are you going to go to Colorado? And so, so the length of time sometimes is, okay, have you been, are you able to fulfill the warranty? And so 5 years is usually pretty good. Most leaks will occur if there's going to be a leak probably within the first year. But I like 5 years. I think that's a good industry standard right now.
So I have to ask you, we've been talking about how there's no license requirement here. So this is the advertisement for Quick Roofing. It says fully insured and have all state and local licenses. So
Yes.
what license is there?
So in some municipalities, like for example Dallas, it's not a license. So I need to maybe even look at that. This could be something. We have 11 offices, but the license to work in a city. Sometimes you have to be within a city. So permitting, you have to be registered with the city with certain cities to work in the city.
Interesting.
If you're not, then they can shut you down your job. And so we've seen this happen where people do not pull a permit. You should want if your locale wants permits, you should make sure they have a permit, because what they can do is come to the job site, the inspector, say, hey, you don't have a permit, shut your job down. And that creates risk and
delay.
And a delay
Sure.
and a frenzy. So then all of a sudden, your job's working in a frenzy as opposed to organized process.
Well, and yet I think that we hear a lot of time people say, oh, don't we know, don't worry, we don't need a permit for this. It's not enough damage, or I'm going to save you a couple of bucks and we'll be in and out of here so quickly that no one's going to show up. Get the permit.
Yes, absolutely. Because if they're taking shortcuts on that, right? I mean, then what you end up happening is it's like, I think the question that I as a consumer would have is, if you're taking a shortcut there, are you going to take a shortcut other places?
Sure.
It's $100, depending, $100 to $250 for a permit. But it does, and there's also some protection. One thing that I would love for your people to know is the final audit we were talking about. People need to check that they should want and request an attic inspection. The reason I'm saying that is you got pipes within the roof that could become detached, and sometimes your cities will help inspect this, but I would ask my roofer to inspect it, because if your hot water heater pipe comes unhooked and your gas, then there's carbon monoxide.
Right, sure.
You're never going to smell that, but it can kill people, but it could also be just illness. And so some of those processes, that's what the city helps you with, is they're going to make sure that, hey, did they cut around here so there's not a fire hazard? So it does protect the consumer. I mean, it's sometimes a little bit of a pain because maybe they want to access your home, but ultimately it is to help you.
We've been hearing a lot from people who are trying to do home renovation, remodeling work. They're saying skilled labor is really at a premium right now. A lot of that is kind of the lingering effect from Harvey last year. A lot of people moved down to Houston because so much of that city had to be rebuilt. Is that still an issue this time of year, this far away?
It is, and obviously roofing's hot, and it's hot right now. So,
Sure.
a lot of guys are not coming into that field right now. So the labor pool is what it is. And what we see is the skilled guys are harder to come by. And that's where I think that people having a plan and being able to explain to you as a consumer, saying, hey, how do you hire your guys? Because if you have a major event, today we could have a hailstorm. Well, it's sunny today, but if we had a hailstorm today that damaged 100,000 homes, where are they getting but today, if it's an environment where there's not a lot of roofers, how are they scaling?
Right.
So that's really important to ask. If they're just hiring somebody and testing them on your home, then you may be at risk.
Right.
And
yeah.
so
are we talking day laborers here? Or are we talking somebody who's a craftsman of some sort? And again, and nothing against day laborers. There are some jobs which are perfectly appropriate for that kind of skill level. But when it comes to something like the roof on my house, I'm going to say that that's probably not one of those.
Yes,
one of those jobs.
It takes time to learn, and I would say that if people have a plan to scale, because there is some scaling that even a company like mine, we're big but we have to scale, and we have a way that we train. Because we do so much new construction. So we're not just a restoration company, we do a ton of new construction. So we use that as a training ground. When we have a relationship with a builder, if we mess up, it's like we're going to get disciplined, but we have a relationship.
Right.
I have one chance if I roof your house. If I roof your home and I mess up, my name's mud.
Right.
But if I mess up there, usually they're just like, hey, you're going to pay to fix it.
Right.
And so a good training method, whether it's here's how we train guys, here's how we vet them, is key. Like I said, that's where people get frustrated is because there's a lot of there's no regulation.
Yeah, sure. It really seems, and we'll end with this, that the key for the homeowner here, I mean, of course, the things that we talked about, the inspection, the estimate, the no cash up front, you know, hey, I'm checking with trade organizations and the Better Business Bureau and so on and so forth. I would think the best advice as well for a homeowner when they find themselves in a situation, especially one that involves some sort of emergency or unexpected repair, as opposed to, oh, I think we need a new roof, you know, we'll schedule it in advance, is, and this is hard, is to try and take the emotion out of the equation. I think that so many people get so afraid and so wrapped up in that it really causes them to make poor choices.
That's an awesome statement. I think that's absolutely true.
That makes the checklist sometimes hard to follow, which is of course why we have this resource for folks. So tell me, where can people find you? I'm assuming you're on the internet, on social media.
Yes, sir. QuickRoofing.com. Again, Jeff Quick founded the company.
I was going to say quick, not fast.
Yeah, Jeff Quick founded it in 1984. And so QuickRoofing.com, and then social media, Quick Roofing. Easy to find, and then you know, our guys, we probably have about 60 wrap trucks running around here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So people see our trucks. A lot of times it's funny because they go, "I see your trucks everywhere." So it's just kind of funny that, you know, we try to put ourselves out there. We live it, we love it, but you know, we have 3 offices here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So Plano, Kennedale, which is our corporate office right near Arlington, and then Keller. So we're pretty spaced out to service everybody.
Perfect. And of course, the process all starts with knowing what to ask and what to look out for. Eric Armstrong, president of Quick Roofing. We certainly appreciate it. Be sure to leave some feedback for us. You can do so on iTunes and the Google Play Store. You can rate our podcast to make sure that we're always at the top of your list. New episodes available each month.
Get all of our basic training episodes on iTunes and for Android. Or listen right now at fox4news.com/basic training.